Okay. So, hi everybody. We're gonna shut up so everyone's filing in for a second. So we'll sit in awkward silence while I'm gonna shut off my phone too.
Good point.
Okay. Sonia, you there?
I am.
Can we see if everybody's in? Or we
Well,
don't
people are streaming in, so we're probably okay to start, and people will continue to trickle. But yeah, we should be good to go.
Yeah, righty. Okay. Hi, everybody. Good to see you guys again, and welcome new folks. Today is one of our favorite things to do when we have a guest star.
That's too generous. Too generous.
Oh, Jody Holt. We're just going to tell you, we'll hear more about our company Kincern, but we're going to dig in together on financial stuff. We know one of the many ways people suffer around illness and end of life stuff is through their wallet. Financial suffering is a very real thing. And for some reason, I don't know if it doesn't get talked about enough or somehow, I'm not sure. I just know it doesn't enter into oftentimes a lot of medical decision-making conversations when it probably ought to. But let me not get ahead of ourselves. We'll introduce Jody in a second. Well, actually, let's introduce Jody now. Jody. Hi, Jody. Welcome, Jody.
Hi, welcome. Thank you. Thank you for welcoming me here, BJ. And you just mentioned money doesn't get talked about. And you can look at all sorts of stats that say exactly that. No one really wants to talk about money. It's kind of an uncomfortable thing amongst families and friends. And so we just kind of throw it to the side and avoid it, which results in all sorts of financial problems. Good morning, everyone. My name's Jody Holt. I'm the Chief Executive Officer and co-founder of a company called Kincern, Kincern. But mostly I'm here because I've spent 30 years as a finance professional, a CPA, doing a lot of CFO work for companies, many of them in the technology space. But recently I had the opportunity to be the CFO of a large continuing care retirement community where families move in that independent living model and stay all the way through of end of life. And as the chief financial officer there, I saw firsthand the problems people have around their money and their finances and administration, and it just causes resentment around people. And so through that and other experiences, decided to co-found this company to really help families with the gaps between all their financial responsibilities and help them pull it all together to have clarity so they can make better decisions and have really better time for the fun things in life or the better things in life. So,
amen.
Yes.
Okay, well, that sounds like the perfect setup. So let's dig in here, guys. And back to you guys out in the audience real quick. Some of you guys will be new. These are things we do routinely, monthly through Mettle Health. We have our webinars, different subject. And the whole way things that Jody and I are going to talk and go through some slides today, just a handful. The slides in our early comments, guys, are really meant to be, level setting, food for thought, provocations. The real action, or so much of the action, is in the dialogue and the Q&A. So please do jump in. Please do participate. No pressure to, but this is meant to be a very safe place to think and feel and ask and say just about anything within basic moral and legal frameworks. So please don't be shy, but also it's great to just listen too. That's totally fine. Let's Sonia, can you pop in here for a second and say hi to the gang?
Yeah, of course. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for spending your Friday morning with us. Just wanted to go over this slide here. So after BJ and Jody have gone through some slides to kind of level set the different discussion topics around financial care, we will hand it over to all of you to ask your questions. And you can do this in two ways. You can raise your hand and we will unmute you, and you can can talk to Jody and BJ, or if you prefer to not do that, you can absolutely type your question into the Q&A and I will read that aloud and get that answered as well. If we are not able to get to all the questions within the hour, we'll do a little second recording so we can get everyone's questions answered. And I think that is it. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Sonia. Okay, and I should also say, guys, my name's BJ Miller. I'm a palliative care doc. So, and as you guys, as questions come up, you can point them directly to me or directly to Jody or both. It doesn't really matter. And we'll all jump in together. Okay, so Jody, you ready? Shall we move on?
Sure.
Okay. Sure. All right. Financial gaps. I will, over to you, my friend.
Yeah, so I kind of mentioned this in the intro, and I think that's really touching on that families have kind of not a lack of clarity around their finances. And so that can cause gaps in kind of the caregiving and the way forward when they don't know what the financial picture looks like. So I think the first thing in anyone's financial discussions is really figuring out what do we have. As a CPA, I would call that the balance sheet. We don't want to get into those technical terms, but it's really sitting down with a professional or with your own family and figuring out what do we have, all the assets, and then really important, all the liabilities. And sometimes those things are very clear with a family. It's very simple. They have a couple bank accounts. They maybe have a mortgage on a home, and they know what that financial picture looks like. But that's really the first step, figuring out what do you have, the assets and the liabilities. Sometimes a liability might also include, you might have signed for a loan for someone else, and your family picture needs to know about that. You need to know about that so we know what the responsibilities are out there. But I think also when we talk about financial gaps, not just the clarity, but also have we put things in place to help take care of long-term care? Things like special insurance policies or taking care of some of the government programs out there. We're going to talk a little bit about Medicare and Medicaid and what those differences are, but really recognizing what the financial picture looks like and pulling it all together. There are certain technologies, softwares out there that can help about that. I won't get into that right now, but just there are tools out there and professionals that can help you pull that financial picture together to know you've got a solid financial picture. Reason I say that, I worked with a family about 2 years ago, and I was talking to the son, and he had a few siblings, and they were talking about care for mom or dad. Mom and dad were starting to show some signs of vulnerability, some dementia, some physical challenges. And they were talking about moving mom or dad into what we call a CCRC, a continuing care retirement community. And we started to peel back the onion. We realized there wasn't enough resources there to be able to move into a very large continuing care retirement community that they had their kind of hearts set on. And so that was a hard conversation amongst the siblings and the parents when they really thought they were in a different financial situation. So they had to make some different decisions. But the problem was they weren't really looking at the true financial picture. So they were talking about all these kind of pie in the sky ideas, but hadn't looked at the financial picture. And so it was going nowhere and starting to cause resentment around the family. That's an example of figuring out the clarity around your financial picture so that you can make good decisions about the type of care that makes sense for the family.
Jody, is there I suppose there's not a fixed answer to this question, but overall, with our framework of serious illness, chronic illness, end of life, is this a continuum? Do you have this conversation once a year? Do you, when there's a diagnosis change, a change in health status, or is there a recommendation of how a family or how a person, and remember a lot of folks out there don't have families. A lot of these folks are doing this by themselves too. So is there a rhythm that you recommend that people sort of take stock?
It's funny you say that, BJ. I'm a CPA. My husband is not. And he's like, I don't want to talk about finances anymore, right? So I think it's being respectful of the relationships around you and how much they can handle. I usually say, this isn't not the conversation to have at the Thanksgiving dinner table, right? Keep those moments for gratitude and time together to just enjoy one another. But I would say at least once a year, particularly if you're in that 60, 70 years of age, you should be looking at it once a year, because it can, like you say, change pretty dramatically. The cost of long-term care, particularly at the later stages of life, are very pricey. And we're going to get into a little bit of that later in the slides. But so I would say at least once a year, certainly when someone's condition changes and that the care needs to change, it's probably good to kind of peek under the covers. I'd also say it's really smart for someone to be monitoring the finances on a pretty regular basis. And you can use, again, technology and software to do that, because those in the later stages of life, most elders, 1 in 5 is a victim of some kind of financial exploitation. And that means 1 in 5, they've either lost their identity, so identity theft, so someone's stealing their Social Security check, or they've opened a credit card or some other credit in their name and are siphoning funds that way. And so there's a lot of vulnerabilities at the later stages of life, particularly when someone is not looking pretty routinely at their financial picture.
Yeah. Got it. Okay. 20%.
Yeah. Yes. Those 65 years old plus, 1 in 5 is a victim of financial exploitation. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, on that happy front, next slide here. So there's a lot of players in this field. I mean, and I think a lot of us won't be familiar with the terminology, CPA, CFP. So yeah.
Right. The mumble jumble of the alphabet, I like to say, right? So there's all these letters out there for all these different types of professionals. And it's true. And they do different things. And so it's helpful if you know the kind of services that you need. So in general, you have a CPA, a certified public accountant, that usually is overseeing your tax return, your federal and state income tax returns. And they're focused on that area and making sure you're making good, sound decisions about what you owe the federal or state government, right? Another advisor here is what you maybe hear as a CFP, a certified financial planner. And they're different than the CPA. They're really more focused on pulling that financial picture together and helping you to understand the financial picture and give guidance and advice around financial planning, making decisions about how to use your resources to make better decisions going forward, right? Then you have, wealth advisors. You'll hear an RIA, a registered independent advisor. In the wealth advisor arena, there's lots of different types in that arena. And, they are really focused on helping you take whatever assets you have, the things you have, cash or stocks or some kind of insurance policy. And they're trying to make sure that you maximize the benefit of that. Get the biggest return is the word you often hear, so that you're taking good, responsible actions around the assets you have. So they can really help there. If we cross over a little bit to the legal side, you talk about maybe an estate attorney. An estate attorney will help you put together your estate plan. Sometimes people say, oh, you need a lot of money to have an estate plan. Not at all. These are really important documents that help with all sorts of things around what you have and your end of life wishes, so that those wishes can be played out. But these documents can also help while you're still living. The essential documents under an estate plan are things like a will, a durable power of attorney over your healthcare, a durable power of attorney over your finances. And those are documents that help if something happens where you can't really make the sound decisions that you need to. Someone else you've named them in the documents, and they can step in and help out to kind of help with that kind of care around finances and admin and your healthcare decisions. So those are really, really important documents that can be done for very small amounts of money today. There are a lot of companies online, some very reputable ones that can help you put these estate documents together that will give you financial security and peace of mind, particularly around end of life wishes, right?
Do you find, sorry, Jody.
Yeah, sure.
Well, do you find that where on this wheel do most people enter? Do most people have an accountant, and then that's the person you can ask, hey, do you know a trust attorney, or is there a way to assemble this wheel?
Yeah, so this wheel, as you can see, there's all these different names around this slide if you're looking at it. And it really depends on your situation. You know, certainly that healthcare professional caregiver is very instrumental in your life, right? So they're very important. I have found with the hundreds and hundreds of people I've talked about in these things, that often for families, they build trust with one particular professional. They've really built a relationship with their estate attorney or with their certified public accountant. I have found that wealth advisors are someone that most people develop a really tight bond with and feel like they can trust them. I would say it's all about who you can trust. But if you have none of these providers in your ecosystem, I would say, what's challenging for you? Do you have an estate plan together at all? It would probably be good to start with an estate attorney. If you have complicated, taxes, then certainly a relationship with a certified public accountant. If you have any kind of assets, a wealth advisor, a trusted wealth advisor is a good one to help be thinking about those, the maximizing the potential around your assets. But
meaning like a home or homes, investments.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
Yep.
Got it. All right. Now let me move on here, guys. Okay.
The Medicare versus Medicaid. What is the difference? And I bet there's some of you on this call that do know the difference and are very familiar with it, but many people don't. And I think I really only learned this from being in my role in senior living. Medicaid is really about someone that is lacking financial resources, and it is run by the states. Medicare is based on your age for the most part, unless you have some qualifying disabilities. So Medicare is really more age related. Medicaid is really more your financial situation related. You've depleted any assets really to be qualified for Medicaid, right? Medicare is a federal program run at the federal level. So no matter where you live in the United States, once you turn 65, you are eligible for Medicare, and you pay a monthly amount to have that kind of coverage. Medicare. Medicaid is more about if you depleted your resources. Every state has a different level, but it's usually around $2,000 actually. And that will supply you with all sorts of healthcare aid, Medicaid. So that's the big difference between the two of those. I was going to say something else about Medicare. You sometimes hear these ads out on TV, a Medicare supplement plan. Right. That is an additional insurance policy. You pay extra for that to have more coverage. Medicare is really for, I don't want to say catastrophic situations, but it's kind of a limited amount of coverage that it would give you. For example, I had this experience with my dad in the middle of COVID, wearing his mask that goes over his earlobes. He lost his hearing aids. Lost his hearing aids. They're not covered by Medicare. And he doesn't have a Medicare supplemental insurance plan. His hearing aids cost $6,000 to replace. That's a big hit for many families, right? It's surprising. It's very surprising to me that hearing aids are not covered under Medicare. So, yeah.
And I think I'm not sure. I think one year to the next, what Medicare will cover and what it doesn't cover isn't often a political and policy volley. So right. What it covers now may shift next year or the year after. Is that a fair statement?
That very fair. And then I mentioned those supplemental plans. There are advisors, going back to that advisor wheel, If you can get with a trusted Medicare insurance advisor, broker, there are different policies that can cover things from like transportation services and all sorts of things. And so it's trying to navigate what kind of care do you think you're going to need to know which policy would most align and be the best policy for you to pay for that supplemental policy, right?
And would most insurance brokers be able to speak thoughtfully about Medicare, or is there a Medicare broker specifically?
You really, in this case, want to speak with someone that has that Medicare supplemental insurance background, right?
Gotcha.
Certainly an insurance professional would know more than me, but someone that is a Medicare insurance provider would know more than probably a general broker.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah. Well, and one other thing to note about from the clinical side, I mean, the Medicare versus Medicaid, one thing that lights up from my end on the clinical side is that Medicaid has social benefits as well as the medical benefits. The medical world, the healthcare world, the health insurance world tends to split you up between your medical needs and your social needs, which drives a lot of us crazy. It's another conversation because we're not split like this. Those things inform each other. We know the emergency rooms of hospitals are packed with people who are there for social issues, not just medical issues. You can't separate them. So anyway, let me get off my soapbox and just say one big distinction between Medicare and Medicaid is with Medicaid, there will be some, very modest, but at least some coverage for home health aides and things like that Medicare would generally not cover.
Right.
So,
yeah.
But that gets back to your point about Medicaid being revolving around income.
Right. And when we talk about a professional, someone that's maybe going to qualify for Medicaid, you think, well, I don't have money to hire an elder attorney, or the family feels that an elder attorney, different than an estate attorney, sometimes they have all that experience, but an elder attorney can really help a family set up so that they can spend down those funds in a very smart way to make sure they don't jeopardize some of the other opportunities around Medicaid. Let me highlight one for you. I learned that, we all wish for a proper burial or cremation or whatever our end of life wishes are. You think you're spending down your money under Medicaid and there wouldn't be any money for a proper burial. Medicaid allows you to prepay around $12,000 to a funeral home, and it doesn't jeopardize your Medicaid eligibility. And that's a really important thing for families, right? That they can set aside that money as they're spending down, put that money over. I think you sign a contract with the funeral home, put your wishes in there, and then your loved one or you yourself can have a proper ceremony at your end of life. So.
Right on. Well, I did not know that, or I'd forgotten it. That's great.
Yeah.
And that sort of preparing to spend remaining resources thoughtfully. Here again, that you kind of need to do that with some time in advance. Right. In other words, when you're on your deathbed or just, very, very super sick and have high needs, is not necessarily the great time to be having this conversation. Right. One thing that came up when we were working on our little book was how thoughtfully did they police this? I've heard that you can game the system, try to move assets out of the person's own. How, any advice on how to stay on the high side of the law on this and be careful?
I as a professional, I would say it does make sense to hire an elder care attorney that can really direct you. Medicaid, remember, said is really state run, so every state's different. Right? Generally they have very similar practices. You want someone in the state in which you are going to qualify for Medicaid. And to get through the process, it's very tedious. Someone told me, think of 10 old-fashioned phone books piled on top of one another. That's the amount of paperwork that needs to be filed and everything. And they take the time to scrub it all. So you really want to work with someone that can pull that all together. There are Medicaid professionals that can help pull that all together. They charge anywhere from $700 to $1,500 to help a family get through this process. I'd advise on leaning on someone to do that so you don't miss the opportunities of Medicaid. And can't be sneaky out there. they will find it. And, you can't really just like hide funds.
Mm-hmm.
There are ways in which you can be smart about it. The big one you talk about is a home, and there's ways to transfer a home to a son or daughter or a loved one, but it usually needs to be 5 years before you qualify for Medicaid, right?
Oh.
So there are some things out there that you can navigate, but like anything, the more proactive you figure out your financial picture and share that with your loved ones, the better decisions can be made, right?
Right on.
Yeah.
Right on.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's see here. Okay. Long-term care. You mentioned there. Yeah.
Yeah. Long-term care. What will it cost? And I like the art you or Sonia picked here.
Yeah.
A woman just, looking kind of frail and a little concerned, right? It is very expensive. It is very expensive, And I think for most of us, we're not thinking about that, right? We don't really want to think about that, right? But it is, the more you can plan proactively for it, the better off you will be. In general, long-term care, this is really in general because there's so many different levels of care and everyone's care situation looks differently. But if someone were to move into an assisted living facility, for example, they are likely going to pay anywhere from $5,000 to $8,000 a month to be in an assisted living memory care facility. Okay. Mm-hmm. That's 24-hour care, meaning someone's down the hall and could check in on you or mom or dad or a loved one. That doesn't include all the maybe additional services someone would need. Okay. Maybe you want to stay at home and you want to bring a private duty nurse in 24 hours a day. That can cost a family anywhere from $10,000 to $20,000 a month, right? To have a private duty nurse in their home for all those hours. A nursing home, if someone gets to a level where they need kind of full-time care, a nursing home can cost anywhere from $10,000 to $20,000 a month for a nursing home. I saw a stat the other day that Alaska is probably the most expensive state in the nation to be in a long-term care facility, and Missouri is probably the cheapest. And the difference in prices for a private room in a long-term care facility in Alaska would cost a family $255,000 a year for 1 year. In Missouri, that same kind of private room, meaning your own room, in a long-term care facility, skilled nursing is a word that's used sometimes, it would be $58,000 a year. So the cost of living in different places definitely plays here. I would say also, I met a family in the last year. Their mom was in a long-term care facility. So I just told you about how much those places can cost for 6 years. And after she passed away, they discovered that she actually had, but they didn't know about it at the time, a long-term care insurance policy.
Oh, no. Oh, no.
And so maybe they could make a claim after. They should be able to, but that would be a lot of paperwork, and they probably need a professional. It would take a little piece of that to get reimbursed for some of that care for 6 years in long-term care.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
And is long-term care insurance, ear to the street, is that long-term care insurance is proving to be insolvent oftentimes and harder to come by. Is that true? Is there any counterpoint that we know of, Jody? I know you're not an insurance expert per se, but do you happen to know, is long-term care insurance as an industry becoming more or less available?
Yeah, so there's long-term care insurance out there still for sure, but you're right. I think they sold a lot. Whoever they is, sold a lot of these policies door to door in the 70s and 80s, and parents and grandparents took advantage of them. And if you bought them when you were much younger, you paid a much lower premium. But there are still good insurance carriers out there that can provide good, sound policies. You got to look very closely at the details, what they do cover and don't cover. And I would say there are professionals that if you're actually going to look for a claim on your long-term care insurance policy and having trouble navigating that, there are professionals that can help you do that, that would make sure you're getting everything you deserve under that long-term care insurance policy. So,
gotcha.
Like many things with insurance, I can tell you a little story of a gentleman I know, and he was in one of these continuing care retirement communities for 17 years. He never used a single day of healthcare while he lived there. 17 years. He moved in when he was in his late 70s. He passed away in his mid 90s and never spent a day in the healthcare center there. And he may have bought policy and he just never used them. What a blessing that gentleman had, right? Really.
Right.
That's kind of a different situation than what the statistics tell us. But so there are policies out there. There are good carriers out there, but not as common as we saw back in the 70s and 80s. And there are some policies and carriers that would be better than others.
Right. And this is one of those there's a curse to our progress in the medical front in some way. We're able to live longer and longer with chronic and serious illness that would have taken our lives a generation ago. So you can imagine the poor actuarial tables are it's pretty tricky stuff. But just to be clear for the audience, health insurance per se does not cover these kinds of costs, whether it's long-term care, assisted living, or skilled nursing, et cetera. I think with the exception, if you've had an operation and you need to be in a skilled nursing center for rehab purposes, I think up to 28 days or 30 days, Medicare and health insurance will cover a short stay in nursing home. But in terms of moving in to spend the rest of your days, that is entirely out of pocket or via long-term care insurance, right?
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And actually, on that note, sorry to interrupt you guys.
Yeah.
Jody, could you talk a little bit about how much Medicare will cover when it comes to a skilled nursing facility or another facility? That was one of the things that really shocked me. And I think most of us think Medicare will cover that type of care once it's needed. And then you find out it's, X amount of days, and then you're on your own.
Yeah, I think BJ just tapped on it. It is not, Medicare does not cover that long-term care stay, meaning that perpetual stay. If you have a hospital visit and need, like BJ mentioned, rehab or something, there's a number of days that you can be in one of these care facilities, but after a certain number of days and what they call readmission and back, you're kind of cut off, and it becomes out of pocket, or what they call private pay, or covered by a long-term care insurance policy. So it's tough. Yeah.
It's really tough. And there is gamesmanship that happens. And I don't know enough to say whether it's, if there's a state by state, but I think it's a Medicare policy. So it would be federal that you get a certain number of 30-day skilled stays where you get to stay at a skilled nursing center for a skilled benefit. It's called the skilled benefit on Medicare, and will only cover if you have to have a certain potential for rehabilitation. You have to be able to participate in physical therapy and occupational therapy, et cetera, for several hours a day. So there are criteria by which you would qualify for this skilled benefit. But even if you qualify, it's only, I believe, 30 days. That can get gamed, and ends up happening very often is if you get readmitted to a hospital, like I think you mentioned a moment ago, Jody, if you get readmitted to a hospital for an acute care hospital level need, and if you're there for 72 hours or more, then the clock can restart on your skilled benefit. So then you might be able to go from the hospital to a nursing home for another 30-day stay that would be covered if you qualify. And this is a way that sometimes you'll see nursing homes, people coming to and from the ER to kind of reset their skilled benefit. I don't know how often that happens. It's a thing. Oftentimes it starts tipping into fraud. They'll find a way to get you into a hospital. I don't mean to go down that track necessarily. It's not a huge player here, but just to say, I think to answer the point here, Medicare will cover up to a 30-day stay based on certain criteria, but it's not to be relied upon for what we call custodial care, which is just living for the rest of your days.
Right.
Okay, shall we move forward, my friend?
Yeah. Yes, thanks.
Okay.
Oh, after death. We may want to advance to the next slide, but just, gosh, so someone has died, and what's that next process called? The probate process, which again sounds like a big scary word. And it's really what happens to these loved ones' things after they pass? How do their wishes get played out? And as you can imagine, the law gets involved here, because we want to make sure that it's a lawful process and the individual's estate, again, sounds like a big fancy word, their estate is handled properly, right? So the first thing that the court, a probate judge, will look at is that last will and testament. So let's assume that there's a will in place, first of all, which I implore everyone on this call, make sure you get your will done and it's up to date and all those things. But we're going to assume you have your will done. And there's usually an executor, again, another big fancy word, named in that will, and they're really in charge of executing on your wishes. An executor executes on your wishes, right? And they will need to meet with the probate judge or the court to help make sure that anything that needs to be paid from the estate gets paid. And sometimes the court will require the executor to post a bond or put some money up to make sure that all the debts of this estate are paid properly. And so they figure that out. They look and see. The executor will pull together kind of a list of all the assets, all the things you have, and all the liabilities, any of those mortgages or credit cards or loans out there that you have, and kind of add that all up and take a look at it and determine the values of all those things. And they'll look and find out, they'll post a death notice, and creditors, people that are owed money, will make sure they're known about, and the executor has the responsibility to make sure they get paid. So pay all those debts, and then prepare a final tax return, right? And then finally distribute the rest of the assets out of the estate to those that you named in the will that would be entitled to, called beneficiaries. So it can be a long process. On average, the average estate takes about 500 hours of someone's time, the executor usually, to handle, and can cost on average about $18,000 to probate, is the word, the estate, to get through all of those things. Some states and some courts charge higher fees than other fees and require different things. California, for example, I think is a very long process right now. The courts are behind. I've heard on average it takes about 18 months, believe it or not, right now in California to get through all the probate process to get to that final distribution of the estate. So again, if you have that will done, it will make it much easier. Sometimes you hear about a trust. And again, people say, oh, trusts are only for the super wealthy. Trust is a legal document where you can kind of, I think of it as a cardboard box, a revocable trust. You can put some of your assets in there, visualize this one. Put those assets in this cardboard box by having this piece of paper that basically says the things you want in there, and you put the title to those things in there, like a title to a home, into this box. And then upon your death, it's easier to distribute those things because they're in this box that makes it tidier to distribute. So it doesn't mean you totally avoid probate, but those things in the trust make it easier to distribute upon death. So
is it a very expensive process to create a trust? I mean,
it really isn't. I mean, an estate attorney in general, these are all general terms, you could hire an estate attorney in probably most states for about $1,500 to do all these essential documents, right? The will, the trust, the durable power of attorney for healthcare and for finances, and the advance directive. All those things could be done for about $1,500. But now there are a handful of companies that are online, if you're comfortable with technology. My sister and brother-in-law just had a situation. He had a very scary heart situation about 6 months ago. She woke up in the middle of the night like, we haven't touched a will or done anything in years and years. And she used a certain provider. I won't disclose the provider's name right now, but one of these online providers. And I think it cost her about $500 to get it all done. Mm-hmm. And it walked her through. She said it took her about an hour, and she answered questions online of some of their desires and the different things they had. And by the end, they then received in the mail a nice, tidy booklet of all these documents all done. And then one important thing, when you get all those documents, you need to take them to somewhere and have them notarized and signed in front of a notary. So
yeah, we've had a couple, when again, back to when we were researching the book, stories about people went to all sorts of trouble to create a trust and everything, but then didn't take that last little step and actually, I can't remember the language, fund their trust or whatever, put the stuff in the trust.
In the box.
Yeah, in the box. Yes. Yeah. It happens not infrequently. So obviously, yeah. Who shouldn't have a trust? I mean, is there, I guess if you have no assets per se, or?
Yeah, but in general, everyone should have a trust. A will, more important than the trust document. But
yeah. Okay.
Ooh, everyone should have a will. I guess that's the way I would say it. Right.
Got it. That's at root of all the various documents we've mentioned, all various processes. Your bottom line would be get a will.
Mm-hmm. Correct.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. That echoes ours too, from the clinical, from a medical point of view. Yeah.
Okay.
Beautiful. Oh, Jody. Okay. Wow, guys. All right. I think that's our last slide. So now the audience should be red hot and filled with.
Yeah, we have lots of questions.
Oh no.
Jody, that was awesome. Hey, and Jody, while we're going to, well, actually, can you just tell the gang, you're modest, but can you tell the gang in a sentence or two what Kincern does? Because it is relevant to what we're talking about here.
Yeah. So about a year ago, I co-founded a company called Kincern, Kincern.com, where we're using technology, a piece of software that is like, think of it as a secure cloud. You can put all your essential information up in the cloud. We hear about the cloud, but it's a way to put all those things in the box, the important documents and pictures and photos and your wishes up in the cloud, as well as aggregating all your accounts. So our software allows you to pull together the bank account, maybe a brokerage account, your mortgage, and pull that all together so that you can see it, read-only rights to see all that activity all in one place. And then we layered what we call artificial intelligence and machine learning over the top to be able to automatically tell you, hey, gosh, the Social Security check was hitting every month on the 18th for the last 20 months. What happened the last 2 months? Why didn't it hit? And that notification would say, someone has been monkeying with mom or dad or my finances. Mm-hmm. It would highlight mistakes. I like to highlight, maybe mom accidentally paid the Red Cross 3 times last month. She wants to donate to the Red Cross, but did she mean to pay them 3 times last month? Mm-hmm. Want to learn those things so you make good decisions. So it's software that pulls that all together in one place. Awesome. What we've added recently is Kincern 360, which is what I call concierge care around finances and admin to help families to even get to a place where they could use the software, right? Some of the steps before you get to automating things. So that's the idea.
Essentially the human element to the software element.
Right.
Is that a fair statement?
A fair statement. And all the questions and like, who do I talk to? And so I like to think of it. Caregiving is this huge. See my arms way out. Mm-hmm. Finance and admin is a sliver of it. And there's just lots of questions that you can come in, ask all our questions, and we'll kind of funnel it through us back out to who are those professionals that can really help you around all those different aspects of caregiving with the finance and admin stuff at top of mind for us, right?
Right on.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Awesome.
Yeah. Thank you.
Sonia, shall we over to you? Do you have an eye on the questions?
Yeah, we've got quite a few here. So obviously this is needed because it is really confusing. So one of the first ones was, are there Medicare supplemental plans that cover home health care aides like Medicaid does, but people who wouldn't qualify for Medicaid coverage?
that is a question for the Medicare insurance professionals, right? And what all those different policies include. So I can't really answer the question. Maybe BJ knows.
Wait, Sonia, can you repeat it again? I'm sorry, I was looking at the chat.
Yeah, no problem. So I think this person's wondering if there is a Medicare benefit or a plan that would cover home health aides in the way that Medicaid does.
My sense is no.
Yeah.
That starts tipping into what would be considered a social service, a social need, not a medical one. And again, don't get me started. But my guess is, my 90% sure guess is no.
Yeah. Yeah. The next question, how does Medicare versus Social Security work? Is it true that you cannot have Medicare if you have not paid into Social Security?
Good question. So paying into Social Security qualifies you for Medicare, but I think you needed to pay in to Social Security, right? And there's different amounts of how much depending on your financial situation, what your Medicare premium would be each month. Typically, the more you made, the more you're going to pay for your Medicare insurance. But if you didn't contribute at all to Social Security, I don't know the answer to that. Do you know the answer to that, BJ?
I don't know. I mean, there are emergency Medicare. So yeah. So I think, right. Yes, there are certain situations, because you can't legally be turned away from an emergency room if you actually have emergent needs. You can be turned away if your needs don't meet acute level of hospital-based care. In other words, you need an intervention or you're going to die. So when the stakes are really, really high, I do know enough to say that if you just land in an emergency room, have never spent, you have no nothing, there is a process by which to get you emergency Medicare to cover this acute care need. And what happens, whether you get to keep that Medicare policy once the acute care need is taken care of, I'm not really sure. But as a stopgap, as an emergency process, yes, when someone's life or death, just about anyone in an emergency room can eventually get Medicare coverage, at least temporarily. That much I can say.
Right. Okay. This next one, person said, who defines the tipping point, or what defines the tipping point between using healthcare insurance versus long-term care insurance?
Yeah, so the policies really, right? And how they read. So the provider will usually look at the insurance and submit, and those insurance carriers decide kind of what's covered and what's not covered. But I think what BJ said earlier on our call is just long-term care. The actual, think of it as staying overnight somewhere, not an emergency room visit, not a hospital visit, is usually not covered by those healthcare policies in general.
Yeah, I think long-term care policies are going to be really focused again on the social side of things, whether it's paying for an aide or time in a nursing home or assisted living, et cetera. So sort of more residential things around daily living, social benefits. If it's a medical procedure, if it's a medication, if it's anything to do with doctors, generally speaking, that's a health insurance issue. So that's basically the breakdown, medical versus social needs.
Yeah.
Okay, we have a hand up over here. Dana, you will have to unmute yourself on your end. Should be able to, can you hear us?
Hi, am I unmuted?
You are, yes.
Hi. Okay.
Hi.
So I had a major financial struggle caring for my pops the last year of his life. And I feel the dynamic may be similar when it comes time to help my mom. Because my father fell often and couldn't get back up on his own, and I was physically unable to lift him, we had to place him in assisted living. Neither of us really wanted that, but we had to keep him safe. So yeah, it was about $5K a month minimum, and his disability pay from his federal job was scraps. So I took a huge personal loan out and paid it back with some of his life insurance money after he passed away. If I didn't have that support, I would have tacked it onto my student loan debt, and who knows when that would be paid off. So while I was only one person caretaking with one, I imagine families of any size experience this. Middle class really just slipping the lower gradient here, and many of us live paycheck to paycheck. So is there something I'm missing? Are there low interest loans for situations like this? And also the figurative wheels fell off my father's bus in about a year pretty quickly. But if my mom has some sort of condition where she needs years of help, I would imagine I would just stop qualifying for loans altogether at this point. And P.S., we did have a social worker. We were on every list for aid. And I imagine those systems and structures are overwhelmed as well.
So you cut out a little bit there, Dana. Thank you for sharing your question, and thank you for being the primary caregiver for your dad. And you know, I'd use the word leveraging yourself, taking out loans to make that happen. You're right. The system's overtapped, right? But Medicaid, if you can get the right elder care attorney to help get, you know, in your case of your mom, to help figure out how can we properly find what they call a Medicaid bed. There are what they call Medicaid beds out there that is long-term care that someone would have to qualify, meaning they've had to spend down or their financial assets. The sooner you start that process, the better. So I think you said you're starting to see, you know, some of the struggles with your mom, and there might be a financial need there. I hope you don't take out another loan. I would pursue some of these programs and start working with them to what does that financial picture need to look like. They can guide you on how that spend down works to find a bed or a place or the services for your mom. You should not have to leverage yourself to be able to be the caregiver for your mom. Certainly there's all those kinds of things that pop up, but in general, you would want to try to keep pursuing that too.
Can I ask another question?
Mm-hmm. Sure.
Yeah.
So I don't know what a Medicaid bed is necessarily, but when my pops, you know, he just was always going into the hospital, and then they would dump him in rehab. They wouldn't let him go home. Yeah. And the rehab location, they did have long-term people staying there. And it was sad. It was like a room with 2 twin beds and a curtain in the middle. So I don't really that's my last, you know, I don't want to do that to my mom. Is that what a Medicaid bed is? Often
the Medicaid beds are a shared room, right? Occasionally, you know, and so, right.
There's no belongings, like it's just a TV and a curtain and no, you know,
Right.
Okay.
Right.
And
thank you. Yeah.
And some of the private facilities aren't much better, but I think it is a general rule of thumb that a Medicaid bed, that in other words, an institution, a facility, a place that will accept Medicaid payment to reserve that bed. You can imagine it's peanuts compared to what private insurers will pay or the public will pay who have means. Mm-hmm. So I think it is a fair statement, Dana, sad and true, that there are Medicaid beds out there, and it kind of gets at so many of these benefits get at, well, what's the alternative? And a Medicaid bed can be pretty dang crappy in all the ways you described. And oftentimes it's better than the alternative, which may be homelessness, or which may be on your couch or whatever else. So many of these things become very deeply relative. But I think it's fair to say that a Medicaid bed is not necessarily a fancy room or a private room. No.
Right.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Dana.
Okay. More questions here. And this one, I'm going to kind of combine 2 of them because they're asking a little bit of the same thing. So this is about probate again. And I know we touched on this, but this is a little more focused. So does someone's estate have to go through probate? What about someone who has nothing in assets, but perhaps small debt or no debt? And I think the crux of this question, and then what someone else asked, is what happens to people who don't have family, but also what happens to the family when their deceased family member did owe something? So what is the role What happens when there are no relatives, and what happens when there are relatives with probate?
Well, the state will appoint I'm blanking on the word right now, but think of a responsible party of the state that will oversee the closure of that individual's estate. But I think the bigger question is here, if mom dies and she had these debts, am I responsible for her debts?
Right.
If you didn't sign for them or co-sign or guarantee them, like I mentioned at the beginning of our call, you are not responsible for them. You are not. But there are different things out there. Sometimes a family, I don't really want to get into it, takes out like a reverse mortgage on a home, meaning they take a mortgage out on their home in the later stages of life. There's some equity in the home and they take that. And if that son or daughter co-signed on that, then there may be a situation where they are responsible for that debt. But in general, if you didn't co-sign, you are not responsible for their debts.
Great.
Yeah. Okay, I got another one that just came in here that said, if your loved one is a veteran with minimal financial means, check to see if there's a veterans home nearby. They said, this person says their VA home was recently replaced and beautiful. So that might be a solution for people as well.
Very, very good point. VA, Veterans Administration benefits and many of our loved ones qualify for veterans benefits. It's surprising how many people don't realize, oh gosh, dad did serve for that 1.5 years or 2 years in the Korean War or the Vietnam War. Look into those things. There are amazing programs and benefits out there, as BJ alluded to, social programs. Check with your state's Department of Aging Services. There are many, many things, but going back to the beginning of this call, it's about that proactive research that you can do upfront that will enable you to access more programs earlier on for the best outcomes of your loved one or you or your loved one.
So would most, state attorneys or elder attorneys, would this VA benefit be uncovered as a part of the natural process of working with these guys?
For the most part, if you've got someone that's, a qualified, trusted, experienced elder care attorney, estate attorney, they usually are pretty familiar with these programs and work closely with a lot of them, so.
Great.
Yeah.
Great. Wow, we are 1 minute till the close.
I know, we still got a few more.
Oh.
You guys have kind of covered this, but maybe we can just do a quick refresh. I think this is something that a lot of people, just need additional repetition. So if a person cannot cover, long-term pay for a facility, what happens to them?
So we kind of addressed it, right? There are a lot of government programs out there. There's daycare centers sometimes that someone can go to. There are other services. Sometimes you can qualify for someone coming into your own home. There are programs with you as the family member is doing the primary caregiving. You can sometimes get reimbursed through certain programs. And so there are resources out there. And it's really tapping into your individual state Department of Aging Services, and I'll use the word exploiting them, checking them out and seeing what's out there. But, in general, if you have the resources, then there's these facilities you can go to. Less resources, less choice, frankly,
Yeah, and this is where the ER ends up being the stopgap, So if someplace, I see someone mentioned in the chat, Linda, thank you, that some places, especially if you've been there for a while, like a long-term care setting, assisted living or a nursing home, CCRC, sometimes, people will bend the rules and let folks stay for a little while longer. It's pretty hard to evict someone at that stage in life. And yes, it happens. So it's pretty brutal. Can be pretty brutal. And as Jody's saying, there are lots of stones to turn over out there. It's hard to find those rocks to turn them over. This is where getting help really matters. Barring all of that, what ends up happening is people if they have to leave a nursing home, have to go home or stay with a relative, that will last as long as it can. And then eventually someone's back in the ER, and then the wheel can start again. And maybe they qualify for the skilled benefit or whatever else. But hospitals have obligations to keep people until they can discharge them safely. So there are all these ways to kind of find yourself landing in the system, at least temporarily, and hop from one moment to the next until death. It can be really clunky, and it's where we find ourselves wishing for sort of an overarching system for all of this. But it is tricky. And there are ways to get through it. Folks like you, Jody, and folks like the professionals you've been mentioning. So keep turning over the rocks, guys. And if barring all else, get to the ER. It's kind of that simple, or that brutal. Well, guys, so it's 11 California time.
We've got one more that
Jody, do you have another couple minutes?
Just sneak in here. Is that okay, Jody? Can we keep you?
Sure.
So this person said, what out-of-pocket costs can we legitimately write off on taxes as far as care goes? Are there any?
I am a CPA, but I don't call myself a tax professional. My experience is mostly being a financial officer of a company. So think of all the company things. That's important to note. When you meet a CPA, make sure they're a personal tax advisor, that they're doing personal tax returns, as opposed to kind of the kind of work I was mostly focused on for my professional career. But, everyone's financial situation is different. There are certain things that can qualify. And it's, again, save those receipts, pull all those things together, and consult with a certified public accountant that is a tax professional. They do personal income tax returns, and they can advise you best on that.
All right.
Great.
Any more, Sonia?
There's a few others, but I think we can get to those separately, and I will reach out to those people to make sure we get their stuff answered. But I think we're good. Thank you so much, Jody. This was really helpful and
huge help, Jody.
Obviously needed.
Well, thanks everyone. It's not the fun stuff to talk about, but it's kind of like take care of that stuff, so then there's more room for the fun
Exactly.
stuff.
It's fun to have talked about it. It's fun to have done it. Exactly. So anyway, thank you, Jody. It's awesome. All right,
Thanks,
guys.
all. Have a nice weekend. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye, guys.
See ya.